Charles Cowart, FTT 210, Customizing and Woodworking, Muzzleloader Lab, week 8 of the course. Today's date is 27 February 2025. For this project, part 1 is supposed to be submitting 10 high-resolution images of the project and one example of each of the following steps. I'll be accomplishing this through the narration of a video, and that video will have all the steps, which is inletting the lock, removing the casting marks from the brass, inletting the butt and toe plates, inletting the trigger assembly, installing the thimble barrel tenons, front thimble, trigger assembly, and trigger guard, shaping the back part of the stock, installing the nose cap, shaping the forend of the stock to kind of match with that nose cap, and then sanding the stock to 180 grits, raising the grain, repairing any dents. And then at the end of that video, I'll do a functions check on the muzzleloader that is behind me. It's functioning properly, and you'll be able to see all that. During this video, there is no live ammunition in my work area at all. It's always locked up. As for the references for this video, it is the Muzzleloader Lab 2nd edition from SDI, pages 7 to 29. Part of this, I'll go ahead and do a little bit of what came for this actual project. The inletting black, it's called Prussian Blue, straight bore light, a black powder muzzleloader kit. Inside this kit, a stock ramrod and barrel. So we have the end cap, we have the thimbles for the ramrod, regular brass washers and screws, the trigger guard, front sight, butt plate, and toe plate. The other stuff, you've got the trigger, the lock, various wood screws, the barrel tenons are in here, the pins for the tenons are in here. There's a spring, the percussion nipple.
So what I'm doing here is adding the Prussian Blue to create marks for me to see where there's high points, and then I can go ahead and remove that with the various chisels to get a really good fit on the lock where it fits snugly, but it's not squeaking where it has to be pressed in really hard. It should fit in and fall out smoothly without any kind of squeaking. So here's the next step we went into, which was just removing casting marks from all the brass. This was a learning point for me. I had never really used files much at all, and at certain points I was getting concerned that I might be removing too much material, and so I would transition to sandpaper to be a little less invasive on the material and remove it a little slower, but it was a good experience. So here I'm showing the results of the inletting of the toe plate and the back plate or butt plate. Unfortunately, the video of me doing that got lost, but this is basically me showing my frustration and my lack of skill at inletting. I eventually got a lot better, but at this point it was very, very frustrating. I didn't know what I was doing, and I needed a lot of work. So the next thing that we got to doing was inletting the trigger assembly. Just kind of like the lock, it's the same idea. You use the Prussian black and put it in there, find the high points, and then work around shaving tiny bits at a time until this thing fits nice and snug. It was critical to inlet in the correct direction so that it interacted with the lock properly. I'd seen people make mistakes on other videos when it came to that, so I was really careful to inlet more backwards than forwards to start off with, and sure enough that wound up paying off as the trigger assembly interacted with the lock perfectly. So here's my work on the rear thimble. Unfortunately, the actual final install isn't seen until later, but it was fairly straightforward, simple, just drilling, making sure that it was centered, and then I went ahead and I threaded the drill hole just to make it easier on that brass. But surprisingly not difficult, and there was some more metal finishing required, but it was fairly straightforward. Moving on from the rear thimble, we did the barrel tenon prep. That actually took a lot longer than I was expecting. The guy on the class provided video basically just used a little bit of sandpaper and he was able to get those things fitting in. I had to do quite a bit of filing to get that stuff to fit. As we could see, they were barely going in, and that was with significant use of the sandpaper. But I did eventually get them in. They were extremely tight, but considering they are what retains the barrel and the stock, it's probably a good thing that they are as tight as they were. Moving on to the front thimble, that was pretty straightforward as well. As long as you use those flats and get centered, just like the video said, it was really easy. Make your mark, use the center punch, then drill, and then countersink, and finally just matching up your holes once you go for final install. On both the thimbles, there was some filing of the screw that retains the thimbles so that the ramrod would actually fit and not engage those screws. So here we see the trigger assembly installed, and now I'm preparing to inlet the trigger guard. This trigger guard was badly manufactured. It was both crooked and twisted, and so even after inletting, it wasn't even close to fitting. When one end was screwed in, the other would sit naturally a quarter of an inch higher than the stock, and the only way to get it to sit in the stock was to screw it in. In fact, I do have concerns long term for that eventually defeating that wood screw and just kind of causing all kinds of problems. Of all the pieces as far as fit, this one was the hardest to overcome, and I wouldn't even say it was overcame. It will be a problem in the future, and I think only a replacement part will fix it. So the next step was shaping the rear stock, and I had so little experience with files and sandpaper that I was really hesitant to work with those, just because of the actual marks that I was making. I wasn't sure that I would be able to get out, so I decided to go with this palm orbital sander and just be really careful. And this worked out actually extremely well for me. I was able to get a uniform removal of material and do it at a speed that I felt comfortable with without making any huge marring or chunking of the wood. So this worked out extremely well for me. I had seen someone else do that on a video prior, and they spoke very highly of it, and it worked out well for me. I also like the fact that my palm sander recovers a significant amount of the wood, the sawdust, and that will enable me to have some sawdust for doing repairs like the gouge that was done when I was inletting the butt plate. Here's the installed nose cap. The key lesson here is to measure, then measure again. When I drilled the holes, one, I drilled a little too far forward and it didn't meet up with the wood under it, and therefore I've got a crooked screw sitting there. It's still tight, but it's ugly, and I might eventually try and acquire a new end cap and redo that whole process to make it look nice. So here I am showing the shaping of the forend of the stock. Not the actual process of it, but it looked a lot like the shaping of the rear. Except for here, I was definitely the most proud. I think I really did a good job on this. It contours extremely well to that nose cap. And then on the bottom, I also tapered it to give it a nice curved appearance as opposed to a hard, flat surface connecting with that nose cap. And I think it flows extremely well. By this time, I think my sanding skills were just getting significantly better and my understanding of shaping material. And finally, here we are using the 180 grit sandpaper, curved sanding block on the curves, and then a flat sanding block on the flats. I feel so about this. Because I used the palm sander to 220, the 180 just didn't feel like a really smooth finish. I'm guessing that the 180 is ideal for the next step, which will be sealing and staining, and that the 220 grit might have closed the pores too much. But anyways, this was fairly easy. By this time I was real comfortable sanding, and later on I would have to fix a couple dents that I found. Raising the grain, I maybe don't have a keen enough eye for woodwork, or maybe it's that particular style of wood, but I really didn't see much difference between the grits as I raised the wood or raised the grain.
So this is the muzzleloader that we've been working so hard on. We are required to do a function check of it, and so that starts with the rear trigger. Lock that to the rear. Half cock, full cock, and there you go. That is the function check. So for part 3, we need to evaluate our learning experience with the muzzleloader build. Specifically, what procedures did I practice that I'll be able to apply to modern firearms. General shaping of wood for any firearm that's got wood as a wood stock. Also filing. There's a lot of filing work in gunsmithing. This was the first class I really got to use it, so that'll help a lot. Also things like removing dents from wood stocks. That'll be invaluable. That was a pretty cool little trick that I learned. And then identify and describe at least one procedure that you would apply to further customize or improve upon my muzzleloader. I know that we're going to wind up finishing the muzzleloader and we're going to crown the barrel, so that'll help with accuracy. As far as function, the length of pull is good for me. The trigger pull is fantastic on it. So maybe checkering, including some grip, some checkering in a couple different places. I don't know how to checker yet. I haven't done the checkering lab, but I feel like once I do learn how to checker, that might be something that I would have to look. This muzzleloader will be more for sitting somewhere and looking nice than it will be for actual function. I'll make sure that it functions, but I'd like to see if historically do these muzzleloaders, does anyone actually checker these things? If they don't, I'm not sure I want to do that, but if there is one thing, it would be that I would probably want to add checkering to it. If not, maybe some carving, something like that. There's definitely some nice things I'm sure that could be done. But overall, it was an excellent experience. This has probably been one of my favorite classes, both my most frustrating, but also one of my favorite classes throughout all my time at SDI. And I really enjoyed it. I just wish we got a little bit more practice doing this type of stuff. It was the most hands-on project so far, and it was a whole lot of fun.